So in this reading, we are going to talk about corporate governance, conflicts, mechanisms, risk, and benefits. So first of all, let's talk about the principal agent relationship and conflict. So what is a principal agent relationship? So basically, this is the in this relation, the principal is the shareholder. The agent, they are the board of directors. So board of directors, they are basically acting as an agent. They are hired, the shareholders have hired board of directors to act in the best interest of shareholder, to act in the best interest of principal. But there can be scenarios where the interest of board of directors and interest of shareholders might not coincide. So that arises, this is a point where conflict is arising. Now we will be talking about that, what are the types of those conflicts and what type of costs the shareholders can bear because of this conflict. So let's talk about, first of all, the cost that shareholders will be bearing, or company will be bearing the extra cost because of this conflict. So we divide this agency cost into two categories. One is called direct cost, other one is called indirect cost. So the direct cost is is a money spent on monitoring. So for example, shareholders or the companies have hired the auditors, audit firms, audit companies. So the fees of audit is a direct cost. Or shareholders have hired supervisors, the fees of supervisors like non-executive directors, that is the direct cost. And what is an indirect cost? If the managers are avoiding risky but profitable projects, so obviously this is the indirect cost, means a loss from poor decision making. So these are the agency costs, or the types of agency costs, and this cost arises because of this conflict of interest. Now, why this conflict is arising? The major reason of this conflict is risk profile. Shareholders, they take the risk; they are the risk takers. But on the flip side, board of directors, they have the risk aversion personality. Why? Because shareholders, these are the owners, or these are the investors who have invested or who have diversified their portfolio. So let's say they have invested in a lot of companies, they have diversified their portfolio, so they have managed or they have spreaded their risk. But on the other side, the managers, the board of directors, whose income is linked with one particular firm. So if that firm, because of taking high risk, if that firm loses, shareholder board of directors, they are going to lose their job, right? So because the risk, board of directors cannot diversify their risk. Okay, so that's why because of this different profiles of risk, different natures of risk, board of directors, they do not take higher risk. But on the other hand, shareholders, they take the risk because they can diversify their portfolio at a lower cost. Or there can be a reason, or there can be other scenario where if the directors, they are favoring their own interest, or they are preferring their own interest at the expense of shareholder interest. Or if board of directors, they are giving favor, they are giving preference to one class of shareholders at the expense of other class of shareholders, this is also the conflict of interest. Now the conflict can also arise because of the information gap, which is the information asymmetry. Okay, so what is an information asymmetry? Board of directors, the managers, they have a higher level of information because they are involved in routine activities, they are managing day-to-day activities, so obviously they have greater level, greater access of information compared to the shareholders. Okay, so managers often know much more about what's really happening in a company than shareholders do. This information gaps makes it harder for shareholders to ensure that managers are acting in the best interest, and this conflict widens, this conflict becomes more intense when we talk about large companies, because obviously when we are talking about larger companies, their operations are complex. They have their footprints in different multiple regions. okay, or if the companies have multiple product lines. So for the shareholders it would be difficult to understand every area, okay, and board of directors, they understand because they are involved in routine activities. And third, it can be if the companies with complex products. So what I'm saying is the information asymmetry or information gap, this information gap between the shareholders and the board of directors will become more widened, will become more intense when we are talking about larger companies, or the companies that have more than one business lines, or companies with complex products, or companies with few institutional investors, or a small free float, okay. So this is the information asymmetry. Okay, so let's talk about the different examples of, or the common examples of principal agent conflict. So whenever we are talking about principal agent conflict, we are talking about the conflict between the shareholders and the board of directors. Okay, so the point number one is manager may put in insufficient effort. So managers may not work hard enough or fail to properly analyze investments and risk. Then what will happen if they are poorly evaluating the projects or poorly analyzing the investments and risk? The result would be poor decision making, and it would lead higher cost for the company. Okay, so let's say if the managers are approving a project without careful analysis just to finish work quickly, so this is an example of inefficient effort. Okay, and obviously when I'm saying that poor business decision, obviously it will lead to higher overall cost for the company, and then who will bear this overall cost? Obviously the ultimate is the shareholder, because shareholder concern is, shareholder interest is maximize the value, maximize the profitability. But when we are talking about insufficient effort will lead to higher cost, that means profitability will be lower. That means just because managers poor evaluation or insufficient effort, or this will lead to overall higher overall cost, is lowering down the profitability. Okay, and the second point is managers getting option grants. Okay, so uh, like for example, there are two things: one is option, one is the grant. So if the managers are paid mostly through stock options, what they will do, they will take excessive risk. Okay, why? Because the managers, when they have the options, do they have any downside risk? No. Okay, and do they have upside? Yes. So if the managers are getting options, are getting stock options, what will happen? Because they have upside, they do not have any downside, they will take excessive risk. Okay, so obviously if the share price increases beyond the exercise price, they are in benefit, managers are in benefit. But if the share price falls below the exercise price, so obviously they will not exercise the option, they will not lose anything, by the way, in this scenario. Okay, but so if the shareholders are being paid, or sorry, the board of directors or the managers are being paid in the form of cash, they might avoid taking risk altogether to protect their job security. Okay, so there are two things: if the shareholders if the board of directors, they have, or they are being paid in the form of stock options. The other point here is cash. Cash is linked with job security. Okay, so if the board of directors are being paid in the form of stock options, because in the stock options they do not have any downside risk, so they will take excessive risk. Okay, as long as the share price rises, share price can increase to any level, it can touch skyrocket. Okay, so as long as the spot price is greater than the exercise price, it's beneficial for the board of directors. Okay, so let's say they have right to buy the shares at $20 and the spot price is $50, they are in the money. Spot price is $100, they are in the money. Spot price is $1,000, they are in the money. The difference is their profit, right? So because of this, board of directors will take excessive risk. Okay, because the payoff is one side, they have upside benefit. I have This is the upside benefit, but they do not have any downside because it's not compulsory, it's not mandatory for them to exercise the option. It's a right. But on the other hand, if they are paying, if they are being paid in the form of cash, okay, so that means they're it's linked with the performance. Okay, it's linked with the job security. So in this scenario, the board of directors will be taking less risk, and because of taking less risk, or because of being risk averse in this scenario, in the form of cash scenario, they may miss profitable opportunities. Okay, so this is a conflict arises between the shareholders and the board of directors. Number third point is empire building. If the manager's compensation is linked with the size of the companies, then they will go for empire building. They will go for excessive acquisitions. Okay, so even if the acquisition is not in benefit of the company, it's not in benefit of the acquirer, but because because their compensation is linked with the size rather than performance, so they will be inclined towards empire building. Like for example, even if the project has negative NPV, but they will go for it because their compensation is linked with the size, not with the profitable projects. Okay, so here their the manager's aim is to control a large organization and increase their own power or salary. That is the interest, even if it comes at an expense of shareholder. Like I said, if the board of directors, they do not have any positive NPV projects, they do not care. Even if the project is negative NPV, I mean, if the project has negative NPV, it's not viable, it's not feasible to go for investment, because the project that has negative NPV is not going to increase the wealth of shareholders. Rather, it will decrease the wealth of shareholders if board of directors invest. Okay, so that's a conflict here. Number four point is managerial entrenchment. So managers might make decisions that protect their own position rather than the benefit of shareholders. So for example, if the managers are avoiding risky but innovative projects, that means managers are taking inadequate risk. If they are one way is if they are avoiding but innovative projects, or they are copying competitors instead of being creative. Okay, or starting projects that only they can manage, so the companies cannot easily replace them. Okay, or directors may also entrench themselves by supporting management decisions instead of challenging them to keep their board safe. Okay, so these are also creating conflict of interest for between the board of directors and shareholders. So technically they are taking less than optimal risk. Okay, or the last point is that creates conflict is self-dealing. So if the managers are using company assets or opportunities for personal gain, so for example, if they are using company funds for personal expenses, or they are awarding contracts to friends or relatives, or using insider information for personal profit. Okay, so these are all the points. The insufficient effort, or stock options, or stock grants, or empire building, or they want to entrench themselves, or self-dealing, they are all creating the conflict between the shareholders and the board of directors. Okay, so now let's talk about the conflict between groups of shareholders. This conflict is basically called as principal conflict, because both the shareholders, let's say we are talking about the controlling shareholder and the minority shareholder, both are the shareholders, both are the principal. So this conflict sometimes also called as principal conflict. Okay, so clearly controlling shareholders, they have the controlling power, they have more voting power, they can influence or control decisions. Okay, so how the conflict can be created between controlling shareholders versus minority shareholders? So let's say controlling shareholders, as I said, they have a lot of investments in one company. So let's say this is the XYZ company, And there are two shareholders, Mr. A and Mr. B. Mr. A has 70% investment in this area and B has 5% investment. So clearly B has lower investment, minority shareholder. Probably the B has already well diversified its investment. B has a lot of investments in multiple companies, and out of that 5% in particular XYZ company. And if you look, the wealth of A is so much tied to this one particular company, so the risk is higher. So to diversify this risk, this A controlling shareholder decided to diversify. I mean, obviously that is beneficial to the A who is not well diversified, but it's not beneficial to the this B minority shareholder, because whose portfolio is already well diversified. Okay, so like the minority shareholders might see it as a waste of company resources if the new ventures are low return, or if the new acquisitions or new investments are unrelated to the main business or core businesses. So this is an example or a scenario of conflict of interest between different these controlling shareholders and minority shareholders. Similarly, we can also have the dual class structure. We can have class A. Class A means they have the more voting power, and then we have the class B, for example, shareholders, they have the fewer voting powers, even if they both are the shareholders. So what is happening here is this system, this dual class structure, allowing class A shareholders or a small group of shareholders to control the company even if they do not own most of the shares. Okay, so this is a class A. So when we are talking about class A or classes, when we are talking about dual class structures, small group of shareholders, they have higher voting powers. It can be founders, it can be family members, you can say, or the class B, they will have less voting power. So the issue with this dual class structure is the power is concentrated in fewer hands, and obviously because they have the more voting power, so they may make decisions that is benefit to themselves, that is beneficial to the class A at an expense of class B. Okay, so this is the reason the CFA Institute discourages dual class voting, because it undermines the fairness and accountability. Okay, so let's talk about conflict of interest between creditors and shareholders. This conflict we already have discussed at a high level detail in the start of reading 21. So you can go back, listen that reading, or you have probably, I assume, read that reading. So we have discussed at a high level detail that why the conflict between creditors and shareholder arises, what are the reasons, how the creditors can protect themselves from this conflict. So let's just talk about a few example of conflict of interest between creditors and shareholder. Number one conflict example is issuing new debt. So these are the examples of conflict of interest between creditors and shareholders. If the shareholders are issuing new debt, obviously the existing creditors face risk because of this new debt, because the leverage is increasing. And by issuing more and more debt, if the companies are not generating sufficient return upon that investment, return on asset, return on equity is lower, that means the company is not adding value from that investment, from that capital, okay, as a source of finance. So but increasing the risk or increasing the debt, or including more and more debt, creating risk for existing creditors who have no upside but have downside. Secondly, shareholders can go for higher dividends. Paying themselves higher dividend means it will reduce the number of assets and default risk will be higher. And the third scenario is high risk taking. So if the shareholders, they are taking loan, they are borrowing, or by issuing the debt, they are investing the proceeds in risky projects. So obviously, if the project will be successful, that will benefit to the shareholders. Why? Because in both scenarios, if the project is successful, or even if the companies do not invest in risky projects, that is not the concern of the creditors. Their concern, as I discussed earlier, is their interest in principal on time. So if the projects are successful, this success, this higher profit, this higher upside potential cannot give any benefit to the bondholders, to the lenders. Okay, so if successful, will only benefit to the shareholder, but if fail, can hurt the lenders. So see the asymmetric payoff. If successful, it is giving benefit only to the shareholder, but if it is being fail, obviously shareholders will lose, but lenders will also, or may also lose. Okay, so this is some examples of conflict of interest between lenders and creditors, or sorry, lenders and shareholders. Okay, so let's talk about the corporate governance and mechanisms to manage stakeholder relationships and mitigate associated risks. So, what is corporate governance, first of all? So, corporate governance is a system of internal controls and procedures by which individual companies are being managed. So, it's a framework that defines the rights, roles, and responsibilities. Okay, so although the main aim or the general aim of corporate governance is managing the conflict of interest between different stakeholders, but more specifically, the corporate governance objective is to manage this principal agent conflict, where the conflict between shareholders and managers. Okay, so what types of mechanisms corporate governance uses to run or to manage the whole company? They have board of directors. Okay, so board of directors, they oversee the management, they ensure strategic direction, what should be the proper risk compliance. They have the independent directors and audit committees, so that the oversight and accountability would be higher. Okay, and secondly, we have the managerial investment incentive systems. So these are the some mechanisms the corporate governance uses. For example, they have the board of directors. The board of directors, they will oversee management. They ensure strategic direction, proper risk management, compliance with laws. They go for independent directors and audit committees, so that the overall oversight and accountability would be enhanced. Then we have they have the managerial incentive system. The purpose is to align the interest of management with the shareholders, like through performance based compensation, like the bonuses, the stock options, the restricted shares. Restricted shares we'll talk about. By the way, the stock options, stock grants, and restricted shares we'll talk about in more detail at level 2. Or because obviously, if the incentive system is poorly designed, that can increase short-termisms, or the transparency is the main key while setting this managerial incentive systems. And there are general meetings. Shareholders can vote on key matters like board appointments, mergers, major policy changes. We have the auditors and internal controls. We'll talk about all in detail one by one. So now we will be talking about shareholder mechanisms, how we are going to manage or protect the shareholder interest. We have creditors mechanisms, and then we have the one I was talking about, board of directors mechanisms. We have the employees, customers, and supplier mechanism, and last is the government mechanism. So let's talk about the shareholder mechanism. So when we talk about shareholder mechanisms, the aim is how we can address the issues of shareholders, or how we can protect the shareholders, or to protect themselves, or to know what is happening in the company, or what has happened over the course of an period or year. Like, for example, the income statement, which shows the performance of the companies, or balance sheets, which shows the position as at particular date. So there are meetings. So when we divide the meetings into two categories, one is called AGM, annual general meeting, and secondly is called EGM, extraordinary general meeting. In for AGM matters, ordinary resolutions is required, but for EGM matters, extraordinary resolution is required. So what type of matters, particularly for example, from the exam perspectives we discuss in the AGM, we talk about approval of auditors, election of directors. But when we talk about EGM, what matters we talk about? We talk about amendments to bylaws, merger or takeovers, shareholder proposed board election, or liquidation of the firms. For all these matters, extraordinary general meeting is required. For these matters like approval of auditors or election of board of directors, annual general meeting is required, or these can be discussed, or these will be discussed in an annual general meeting. Annual general meeting is happening once a year, but the EGM, extraordinary general meeting, can be called anytime depending upon the shareholder requirement, okay, or depending upon what's the requirement. So for example, if there is a merger or takeover decision making happening mid-year, so then extraordinary EGM meeting can be called. So these are the matters that we talk about in the AGM and EGM. Now, obviously, it's written in the corporate laws that when the annual general meeting must occur or how the meetings must be communicated to the shareholders. But I mean, anyone who is a shareholder is allowed to attend the meeting. If a particular shareholder does not want to attend the annual general meeting, that particular shareholder can assign the proxy. The proxy is basically a person. It can be a director, it can be a member of management, or shareholders investment advisor. That person, that proxy, can attend the meeting on behalf of the shareholder. Proxy on behalf of shareholder can cast vote on behalf of shareholders, or leave the vote to the discretion of the person to whom the proxy is assigned. Okay, so this is the shareholder mechanisms, and we are talking about annual general meeting or extraordinary general meeting. Okay, so what is the activist shareholders, or what is the activism strategy or techniques? So these are the investors, like it can be hedge funds or group of shareholders who use their ownership position, the activist shareholders, to influence a company's management or strategy. Why they are pressuring the companies? What's the reason? What's the motive behind this strategy? The motive is they want to improve company performance, governance, or share price. So what are the examples, or what types of activist actions they can take? Let's talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about the activist shareholders or activism strategies, or the activism actions shareholders will be taking. So they can go for shareholder lawsuits. This is the activism strategy. I mean, taking legal actions against management for mismanagement or unfair practices. They can go for shareholder lawsuits, or shareholders may be trying to get their representatives elected to the board. Number three, the shareholder resolutions. Shareholders would be proposing issues for voting at the annual general meeting. Number four is public campaigns. Shareholders can go for using media or open letters to pressure management to act in the best interest to create value. Because as we discussed, what is activism, or why shareholders are involved in activism strategy is because they wanted to improve the company performance. Or they can go for proxy contest. What is proxy contest? It's an activist group seeks to collect voting rights from other shareholders to support their proposals. For example, to replace board members or to approve specific changes. Or they can go for tender offer, where the activist or acquirer offers to buy shares directly from shareholders. The person who is activist or the acquirer is offering other shareholders that I am willing to purchase your shares at a premium because the aim is to gain control of the companies. Or there can be a hostile takeover, which is a hanging sword on management. So here, the acquirer directly approaches the shareholder of the company. So if we are talking about the subject company is XYZ, so the acquirer, let's say it's a group of shareholder, will approach, if they wanted to gain control of this XYZ company, rather than approaching the management, they will approach the shareholder of this company. So this is basically the hostile takeover. Obviously, this hostile takeover or hostile strategy will disciplines management, because this hostile takeover will motivate the management to perform better to avoid this hostile takeover. Because in case of hostile takeover or a successful takeover, the management will be replaced. So to avoid being replaced, management will act in the best interest of shareholders or create value, so that there is no hostile takeover. Okay, now against these activism actions, what are defenses available on the management side? We have discussed one already: staggered board, where only part of the board is elected each year, or making it hard to replace the whole board quickly, because if the shareholders removes all the board of directors at once, that will create uncertainty or major overhaul overhang. So there is a staggered board. Or poison pill, the management is offering to sell the shares or additional shares at a discount. Now, when the management will sell the shares to the existing shareholders at a low price, this will dilute the control of acquirer or the controlling shareholders. So the risk of activisms will be lower. So these are the activism strategies, and on the right side we have the takeover defenses. So make sure you understand everything well from this para. Okay. So, although we already have discussed the creditor mechanism earlier in this reading as well as in the previous reading 21, but let's talk about now again. The purpose of creditor mechanisms is to protect the bondholder, to protect the lender. So when a company issues a bond, it specifies the rights of bondholders and company's obligation in a legal document called a bond indenture. We'll talk about in more detail what are the components of bond indenture, and what are the types of terms that we include in bond indenture in fixed income topic. So an indenture typically includes covenants that may require the company to take certain actions. We will discuss this. This is, if the lenders are requiring the shareholders, requiring the company, requiring the borrowers to take certain actions, we call it as the affirmative or positive covenants. Or there may be a restrict. For example, if the lender is saying that borrower cannot take more loan, borrower cannot pledge the existing collateral for new loan. Okay, so that is a negative covenant. But do not worry, we'll talk about in more detail in the fixed income topic that what are the affirmative covenants and what are the negative covenants. And to protect the interest, the bond can be secured by collateral, which is the specific assets pledged as a security. In case the company defaults on the bond, bondholders have a claim on the collateral. A financial institution may act as a trustee to monitor the company's compliance with its bond covenants and safeguards bonds holder interest. Now, when an issuer experiences financial distress, creditors committee may be created. Different bondholders, they will coordinate and they will create a committee. Purpose is protection. Uh, when we talk about, it's a depend. In some jurisdictions, the formation of such committee is required when a company files for bankruptcy, or a group of bond investors may form an ad hoc committee when the company is struggling to meet its obligations. So, while such committees do not officially represent all bondholders, their interests are generally aligned with the broader bondholder group. So, this is the creditors' mechanisms. Now let's talk about board of directors and management mechanism. So all we are talking about here is what we started for corporate governance, and how corporate governance is making sure that the interest of different stakeholders is aligned and is being managed. We have discussed shareholder mechanisms, we have discussed creditor mechanisms. So now we are talking about board of directors, how the board of directors can make sure that shareholders, we are acting, or management is acting in the best interest, or we are creating the value for board of directors, or we are creating value for the company. So then the board of directors, there are different committees that report to the board. So we have the audit committee. So from the exam point of view, you need to understand that what components are included in every committee. So I mean, what are the jobs of audit committee, what is the job of nominating governance committee, what's the job of compensation committee. So the job of audit committee is oversee financial reporting and implementation of accounting policies. And secondly, the audit committee is also responsible for checking the effectiveness of internal controls and the internal audit functions. Third is they are responsible for recommending an independent external auditor, recommends the appointment and what should be the compensation of external auditors. And then they also go for proposes corrective actions based upon internal and external audit findings. So whatever the internal auditors and external auditors have presented their findings, based upon that findings, what is the possible remedies, what is the possible correct action. So it's being recommended by audit committee. So then we have the nominating and governance committee. It's a slash nominating slash governance. So kind of two jobs being managed by these. Hybrid committee, we can say. When we talk about nominating aspect, so this committee is responsible for oversight of company's corporate governance code, including board elections, setting policies for nomination of candidates, implementing the company's code. So these are the points that you need to understand regarding governance committee. So when we talk about compensation or remuneration, what should be the compensation? What the types and amounts of compensation for directors and executives, it's decided by this committee. So this committee also oversee the employee benefit plans and senior management evaluation. So obviously, the composition of this committee cannot be consist of on board members, on executive directors, because they cannot set their compensation by themselves. So make sure you understand this point, that this committee must be composed of independent directors only. Now these are the very general form of committees almost every organization will have. We have some other committees, like it depend upon the industry specific. So for example, for financial institutions, risk committee is important, advises the board on risk policy and risk tolerance, oversee enterprise risk management. Okay, so this is risk committee is important for financial service industry. Or investment committee is very common in insurance industries or asset management types we can talk about. So they review and report on investment and capital management policies, ensure that investments are prudent, aligned with company objectives. So these are the different types of committees and their tasks that you need to understand. Okay, so now let's talk about employee, customer, and supplier mechanisms. How the conflict, or how we can protect the employees, or there are labor laws, there are employment contracts, and the right to form unions are. These are the mechanisms that can be used to protect the employees. Or there can be employee stock options plans, as we have discussed already earlier in this reading, that the purpose of employee stock option or stock ownership plans is to align the interest of employees with that of company, align the interest of employee with that of shareholders, so that the conflict can be managed. Similarly, the conflict between customers and the businesses supplier, and the businesses supplier and the companies can be managed through having Contracts, as we have discussed, the conflict between creditors and companies can be managed by having bond indenture. Okay. Similarly, we can talk about the government mechanisms, how government can manage their can govern the actions of the companies. Government, it's I mean, they are the regulatory authorities. They can establish different agencies to regulate industries or sectors like financial markets, or they can go for specific issues like what are the workplace safety and environmental protections. Okay, so these are these are the actions that can be taken by the government. So let's talk about what are the risks of poor corporate governance. Okay, so let's talk about the risks of poor governance and stakeholders, and benefits of effective governance and stakeholder management. Okay, so when we are talking about what are the risks of poor corporate governance, okay, so number one is weak oversight and fraud. Obviously, if the board of directors and auditors do not properly monitor management, then mistakes or fraud can happen. For example, management might manipulate the financial statements to show fake profits. And then what will happen? Loss of investor trust and fall in share price. So that would be the result of weak oversight and fraud. Secondly, the managers acting in their own interest. We have discussed a lot that if managers are acting in their own interest, how this can affect the shareholders, how this can affect the value of the company. Because obviously, why the managers will be acting in their own interest? Because the governance is weak, because there is no proper monitoring. And obviously, because of in the absence of proper monitoring, managers may focus on personal benefits like bonuses, job security, or perks instead of company success. And then the third point is unfair treatment of stakeholders. Like we have discussed, the conflict between shareholders, controlling shareholders versus minority shareholders. Controlling shareholders are taking actions at the expense of minority shareholder. We have discussed in a detail. Okay. So and then the last is last but not the least, the legal and reputational risk. If the governance is weak, it will lead to violation of laws or regulations, and violation will lead to causing lawsuits or fines. Okay, so for example, if company is hiding information from regulators, later will face penalties and loses credibility and reputational damage. And the last is credit and financial risk. If there is a poor management, if the corporate governance is weak, what will happen? There will be a poor creditors' rights mechanisms. The company will not be able to protect creditors' rights, or there would be a weak financial discipline that will cause default or bankruptcy. So you can say that the weak corporate governance will lead to, or in case of weak corporate governance, the risk of default is higher. So what are the benefits of effective governance? All is opposite what we have studied. It would be better decision making, because there would be a more checks and balances, ensuring decisions benefits all stakeholders, reduce risk of frauds because internal controls and audits prevent mismanagement or manipulation, higher investor confidence because transparency is higher, accountability is higher, strong internal control, proper checks and balances will lead to higher investor confidence. And higher investor confidence means lower cost of capital, because they will be ready to invest in your company at a lower required return. And then the fourth point is regulatory compliance, following laws and ethical practices. Obviously, we are complying every possible laws, rules, regulations, ethics, all that. So lower legal penalties and reputational harm. Rather, I can say that there will be no legal penalties. And the last point is treating all stakeholders fairly, because obviously, if we have a strong corporate governance, we have to treat all stakeholders, employees, customers, creditors fairly, and this fair treatment is creating a sense of loyalty and stability. Okay, so this is all about this rating. We will end our class here. Revise this, understand it. Your focus should not only on memorizing, rather you should understand everything. And you have my contact number. You can like I am writing my contact number here as well. So you can WhatsApp me at this. If you have any confusion, we can discuss it. I can sort it out. I will try to reply or sort it out immediately, depending upon the time differences we have. All right, take care. See you in the next session with reading 23.